Can a game misuse its gimmick? Actually, I don't like the way that question's phrased, as if any novel idea or mechanical approach is some sly marketing tactic. But it's the question I arrived at playing Timeframe all the same. In this case, the gimmick in question is slow motion. The entire game consists of 10 seconds of time stretched out to 10 minutes, at the end of which the world ends and everything resets Groundhog Day style. And watching statues crumble, leaves fall, and comets soar overhead in slow motion is a sight to behold. It tends to lend everything a sense of gravitas, which makes sense given that this is a game about the, end of the world. But it's also perhaps a bit overplayed between the slow motion, the sweeping vistas, and the magic hour lighting. If you throw in a helicopter or two, you'd have all the makings of a Michael Bay film. Still, there's no denying that it does look pretty. Gorgeous, even. Golden light pours over the hillsides as pollen sits suspended in midair while the specter of your demise grows ever larger in the sky. And that powerful imagery is complemented by a dynamic soundtrack by Clark Abood, which is just phenomenal. And it's good that it looks and sounds so beautiful because most of the game is spent just walking from the spire where you spawn to the 13 other points of interest. The game is designed such that it'll take 4 or 5 of the 10-minute cycles to visit all of them, and that's if you know where you're going. And once you reach each of the landmarks, you collect your little factoid lore sheet and move on to the next one. The result is a game that is probably best experienced as a Zen game, a title you load up to relax or zone out to. It's pretty, it's peaceful, and it's just structured enough to give you some directions on where to go and what to do. And to that end, it succeeds nicely. It's not as great of a nature walk as, say, Proteus, and it's not as great of a zone-out game, to me anyway, as something like Race the Sun, but if you want to chill out to a game that's less gamey than the latter and more gamey than the former, then this is ideal. But back to the gimmick. There is, after all, no reason why you can't walk around for 10 real minutes, only to have the comet come really fast in the last few seconds and wipe out everything. So why the slow-mo? Well, players watch as the empty sky eventually gets a bright little dot that grows to a giant, big, burning second sun, and then eventually Doomsday arrives, all in the span of 10 minutes. And that progression echoes the experiences of the culture whose artifacts you're collecting. They first saw the comet 4,000 years ago, and every time it appeared, it inspired and scared them. They began calling it the Nomad, and religions formed around it. Religions that spawned sects, and even had a savior figure called the Agregariate. Then, hundreds of years later, as science took root, they observed that the comet would impact them in a few decades, and in a desperate plea for survival, found a way to combine their consciousness and send their collected knowledge, culture, and history into space so that it would survive, which is where the player comes in, acting as a science-realized Agregariate and therefore savior to these people. The slow motion tries to get the player to experience those same emotional arcs that took the lost culture millennia to go through, from everything's fine to hey what's that to oh god we should worry about this to waiting for the end to come, all in 10 minutes. It replicates the history of the people you represent and presumably helps build empathy with them. So is that enough to justify doing the whole game in slow motion and the bigness and gravitas that comes with it? I don't know. When I read a short description of the game, I thought it would be about the connected nature of things. A sort of video game cloud atlas. Repeating the same 10 seconds over and over again in slow motion could allow you to see how 5 or 6 disparate events could be traced back to a single cause, to watch the synchronicity of time passing by being able to observe all that's happening in one single moment, to view how all of these events contributed their part to the end result, whatever that may be. Instead, we're presented with a dead world, and while the slow-mo crumbling statues and falling leaves are undeniably pretty, they're hardly showing us the subtle intricacies of causation. I was hoping we'd get something that combined the Groundhog Day element with the slow-mo element, and the game we got doesn't, really. And again, I hate critiquing like that. I prefer to judge games on whether they succeeded at their own goals rather than some arbitrary metric I've invented for them. But I'm not sure it does that either. None of the themes really resonate, or at least none of them are developed enough to resonate. The lore is simply too sparse, and the environment's too desolate for you to really develop any empathy to this dying race. It needed the minutiae of their lives to convey that, little details about how they lived and died. Timeframe also touches on death and the end of things, but because of its cyclical nature and the optimistic ending, it doesn't really have a sense of weight or finality to any of it. It certainly doesn't delve into the sort of existential angst that Continue 98765432110 does. It's about religion and science and how the two are intertwined, but that commentary is too ethereal to hold up such dense subjects. They get sort of inferred in the lore and the iconography, as tribal markings and stone monuments give way to wind farms and telescopes that are nevertheless still obsessed with fate and the stars. It is, then, a game that gestures at a lot of big ideas without being able to commit to any one of them, and while it may succeed at making you think interesting things while you meander its hills, the game itself doesn't bring much to the conversation. Like I said, it works as a lightly structured Zen game. The views are gorgeous, the dynamic music is fantastic, and it's a really peaceful experience despite repeatedly dying to a comet impacting with the force of a several kiloton explosion. But it aspires to a grandiosity it never quite earns, and the slow-mo doesn't help with that. It feels like it's grasping for the profound and lands at the, huh. I really enjoyed myself strolling around Timeframe's hills, but as beautiful as they are, I wish they had more to actually show me.